The great hall of the galactic station buzzed with angry voices. Giant alien creatures stood around a glowing table, their eyes fixed on the holographic map floating above it. 3 star systems pulsed red on the display, the prize that everyone wanted. "This is madness," growled Ambassador Vec, his scaled face twisted with rage. His people, the Saruds, had ruled those systems for 300 years. Now some upstart species dared to challenge their claim. Elder Zek raised one of his 4 arms for silence. The ancient being's crystal body sparkled under the station's lights. "The Galactic Predator Council has made its decision. Any species may send 1 champion to the hunting grounds. The survivor claims all 3 systems. 1 champion against the apex predators of 6 worlds." Ambassador Rim's voice came from the shadows where her dark form barely showed. "It is a death sentence." "That is the point," Elder Zek replied coldly. "Only the truly worthy will survive. The weak will feed the strong, as nature intended." Most ambassadors had already refused. The Centauri delegation had walked out in disgust. The Vegan Empire called it barbaric. Even the war-loving Martok clans had declined, knowing their best warriors would die horribly on Vex Prime. Then the doors opened. Captain Tay walked into the hall. His simple grey uniform looking plain next to the elaborate robes and armor of the other delegates. Behind him came a young woman carrying a worn backpack and a small tablet computer. The hall fell silent. Then someone started laughing. Ambassador Vex. Booming laughter echoed off the walls. "This is Earth's champion, a little girl." The woman was indeed small by galactic standards. Nari stood barely 5 feet tall, with short black hair and calm brown eyes. She wore simple clothes, dark pants, hiking boots, and a green jacket. Nothing about her looked dangerous. "She looks like she would break if I touched her," rumbled Kale, Vex's son and the Saurid's chosen champion. The young reptile was 9 feet of pure muscle, with claws that could cut through steel and scales that could stop laser fire. From across the room, Voss hummed with amusement. The crystalline being's body was made of living diamond that could phase through solid matter. "Is this some kind of joke, human?" Even Rim seemed confused, her shadow form rippling with what might have been laughter. "Earth sends a child to face us. How insulting." Captain Tay's face stayed calm. "This is Dr. Nari Kim, our chosen representative. She has our full confidence." Dr. Elder Zek leaned forward, his crystal eyes studying the small human. "What is your specialty, young one?" Nari spoke for the first time, her voice quiet but clear. "Xenobiology. I study how alien lifeforms live and hunt." This brought fresh waves of laughter from the assembled predators. "You study us in books." Kale's voice was full of scorn. "I will show you how we hunt in person, little human. It will be the last lesson you ever learn." Nari looked up at the towering reptile without fear. "I look forward to it." Something in her calm tone made the laughter die down. Elder Zek studied her more carefully. "You understand what you face on Vex Prime. The hunting grounds contain the deadliest creatures from 6 different worlds. The terrain itself is designed to kill. Most champions do not survive the first hour." "I understand," Nari said simply. "Then you are either very brave or very stupid," Rim's voice whispered from the shadows. "Maybe both," Nari replied with a small smile. Captain Tay stepped forward. "The human race accepts the challenge. When do we begin?" Elder Zek's crystalline features showed something that might have been respect. "Tomorrow at dawn, station time. Each champion will be transported to different zones on Vex Prime. The hunt begins immediately upon arrival. There are no rules except one. Only one may leave alive." The other champions began discussing strategy, but Nari remained quiet. She pulled out her tablet and began reviewing her notes. The screen showed pictures and data about various alien predators, their hunting patterns, their weaknesses, their behaviors. Kale leaned down to look at her screen. "Studying will not help you, little human. When I tear you apart, your books will not save you." Nari looked up at him calmly. "Did you know that most apex predators have never been hunted themselves? They don't know what it feels like to be prey. The reptile's eyes narrowed. What are you saying? Just an observation, Nori said. Returning to her tablet, Captain Tay watched the exchange with interest. He had argued against sending Nari when Earth's military leaders suggested her name. She was just a student, barely out of university. But her professor had shown them her research on predator behavior. Her papers on persistence hunting and pack dynamics had impressed even the toughest generals. She understands them better than they understand themselves, Professor Han had said. And more importantly, she understands something they don't: how to think like prey and use it as a weapon. Now, watching Nari calmly study her opponents, while they dismissed her as weak, Captain Tay began to understand what the professor meant. Voss's crystalline body chimed softly as he moved closer. Tell me, human, have you ever killed anything? Nari looked up from her tablet. Does swatting mosquitoes count? The alien predators laughed again, but this time it sounded less confident. I have killed hundreds of beings, Voss said proudly. I phase through their bodies and solidify inside them. Death is instant. That's very efficient, Nari said politely. Efficient? Rim's shadow form rippled with anger. I have stalked prey for days, learning their fears, feeding on their terror before the final strike. Killing is an art. I prefer quick deaths myself, Nari said. Less suffering that way. Kale snorted. You will not have a choice in how you die, human. My people have been apex predators since before your species learned to use fire. Nari nodded thoughtfully. That's a long time to be at the top. Must be nice never having to worry about anything hunting you. Something in her tone made the three predators pause. For just a moment, they saw something in her calm brown eyes that made them uncomfortable. Something patient and calculating. Then the moment passed, and she was just a small human again. Rest well tonight, champions, Elder Zek announced. Tomorrow, the hunt begins. As the great hall emptied, Captain Tay walked beside Nari toward their quarters. Having second thoughts, he asked quietly. Nari looked back at the three alien predators, who were still discussing how quickly they would kill her. No, she said softly, but I think they should be. The transport ship dropped toward Vex Prime like a falling star. Through the small window, Nari watched the planet grow larger. It looked like a green and brown marble, but she knew better. This world was a graveyard disguised as a jungle. Final approach, the ship's computer announced in a cold voice. Champions will be deployed in 30 seconds. Nari checked her backpack one last time. Water purification tablets, basic medical supplies, a small knife, rope, and her tablet computer. Not much compared to the weapons her opponents carried. Kale sat across from her, sharpening his natural claws on a piece of metal. Each claw was as long as Nari's hand and sharp enough to cut through bone. His scales gleamed like black armor in the ship's dim light. Ready to die, little human? He asked without looking up. Ready to learn, Nari replied calmly. Voss hung suspended in the air near the ceiling, his crystal body refracting the light into rainbow patterns. The hunting grounds have claimed over 3,000 champions in the past century. You will be number 3001. That's a lot of data points. Nari said, making a note on her tablet. Rim spoke from the corner, where shadows seemed thicker than they should be. You treat this like a school project. This is life and death. Everything is life and death if you think about it long enough. Nari replied. The ship shuddered as it entered the atmosphere. Through the windows, Nari could see the hunting grounds. Spreading out below them, it was not one environment but many, all smashed together by ancient technology. Desert flowed into frozen tundra. Swampland bordered fields of sharp crystal, and everywhere, jungle covered what remained like a green blanket of death. Deployment zones selected, the computer announced. Champion Kale, Sector 7, Crystal Caves. Champion Voss, Sector 12, Frozen Wastes. Champion Rim, Sector 4, Shadow Marsh. Champion Nari, Sector 9, Deep Jungle. Red lights began flashing. Doors opened in the floor beneath each champion. May the strongest survive, Elder Zek's voice crackled through the speakers. One by one, the champions dropped. Through their doors, Kale roared a battle cry as he fell. Voss simply phased through the ship's hull. Rim melted into darkness and was gone. Nari was last. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and stepped into empty air. The fall lasted only seconds before her parachute deployed. She drifted down through the thick jungle canopy, branches scraping against her as she descended. Finally, her feet touched solid ground in a small clearing surrounded by massive trees. The moment she landed, the jungle tried to kill her. Vines shot out from the trees like green snakes, trying to wrap around her arms and legs. She rolled to the side, pulling out her knife to cut herself free. Flowers the size of dinner plates turned to face her, their petals opening to reveal rows of needle-sharp teeth. Something roared in the distance. Then something else answered from a different direction. The hunt had begun high above. On the galactic station, hundreds of beings watched the action through floating screens. Each champion had a camera following them, broadcasting their struggle to survive. "The human is already in trouble," laughed Ambassador Vec. On the screen, Nari was dodging acid spit from a tree that looked innocent until it tried to dissolve. Her face, "She moves well for prey," admitted General Rox of the Martak clans. "But movement alone will not save her here." On another screen, Kale was tearing through a pack of crystal wolves with his bare claws. Each swipe sent shards of broken creature flying through the air. He was a perfect killing machine, just as his people had bred him to be. Voss had found the frozen sector and was hunting ice bears that could camouflage themselves in the snow. But his ability to phase through matter made him nearly untouchable. When the bears tried to maul him, their claws passed right through his crystal body. Rim had vanished completely into her swamp, becoming one with the shadows. Only the cameras could track her as she stalked a group of mud dragons through the murky water. But Nari was doing something none of them expected. She sat down in the middle of the clearing, surrounded by hostile plants and hunting calls in the distance. She simply sat cross-legged on the ground and closed her eyes. What is she doing? Elder Zek leaned forward, studying the screen with confusion. "I think she's given up," said Ambassador Vec. "The human mind breaks easily under pressure." Captain Tay watched from the human section with growing worry. The other viewers were starting to laugh and point at the screen, showing Nari sitting motionless. "Move," he whispered to himself. "Whatever you're doing, do it fast." But Nari didn't move. Minutes passed. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. The other champions were already deep into their hunts, leaving trails of dead creatures behind them. And still, Nari sat like a statue. Something large crashed through the jungle nearby. A hunting call echoed through the trees, closer now. The acid-spitting plants turned toward the sound, their petals opening hungrily. Still, Nari didn't move. 15 minutes, announced the station computer. Champion Nari remained stationary in Sector 9. The laughter from the watching crowd grew louder. Bets were being placed on how quickly she would die once something found her. But if they could have seen inside Nari's mind, they would have stopped laughing. She was listening. Every sound that reached her ears told a story. The way birds called to each other revealed which trees were safe and which were traps. The pattern of insect buzzes showed her where water flowed underground. The distant roars and hunting cries painted a map of predator territories in her head. She felt vibrations through the ground, large creatures moving in patterns, one circling to the north, another hunting to the south. She smelled the wind and knew which way the weather would change. Most importantly, she was learning the rhythm of this place. Every world had a rhythm. Earth's jungles had taught her this during her research trips to the Amazon and Congo. Predators and prey moved in patterns as old as evolution itself. If you could learn the pattern, you could predict where everyone would be. 20 minutes passed, finally. Nari opened her eyes. The jungle looked exactly the same, but now she understood it. She knew which plants were carnivorous and which were just hungry for light. She knew the difference between the call of a hunting pack and the cry of a single stalker. She knew where the water was clean and where it would kill her. Most importantly, She had identified the apex predator of this sector. Something massive was moving through the jungle about half a mile away. The other creatures went silent when it passed. Even the carnivorous plants seemed to shrink back from its presence. The station computers had called it a Nexa, a shadow cat the size of a shuttlecraft. With claws that could tear through starship hulls, it was already hunting the other champions. Nari stood up slowly, shouldering her backpack. The watching crowd on the station fell silent, expecting her to finally start running or fighting. Instead, she picked up a small stone and threw it at a tree 30 feet away. The stone hit with a small thud. Birds exploded from the branches in alarm. Their cries echoed through the jungle. A clear signal that something had disturbed the peace in Sector 9. Then Nari began to walk. Not away from the danger, but toward it. On the galactic station, Captain Tay finally smiled. "She's not running," he said quietly. "What?" Elder Zek turned to look at him. "She's not running from the predator," Captain Tay repeated, louder now. "She's hunting it." Nari moved through the jungle like smoke. Her feet made no sound on the soft ground. Her breathing was steady and quiet. Every step was carefully planned. Every movement had a purpose. Behind her, the watchers on the galactic station were confused and amazed. "How is she doing that?" whispered General Rox. On the screen, Nari seemed to flow around obstacles without touching them. Branches that should have caught her clothes moved aside. Vines that grabbed at everything else left her alone. "She's reading the environment," Captain Tay explained with growing pride. "She knows which plants respond to movement and which respond to heat. She's avoiding their trigger zones." Elder Zek studied the screen more carefully. Impossible. Number 1 learns the hunting grounds that quickly. But Nari had not learned the hunting grounds. She had learned something much more important. She had learned the Nexa for the past hour. She had been following the massive shadow cat without it knowing. Every broken branch, every claw mark on tree bark, every half-eaten carcass told her more about how it thought and moved. The Nexa was old and smart. It had been the king of this jungle for decades. It knew every path, every hiding spot, every weakness of every creature that lived here. But it had one flaw that Nari's 20 minutes of listening had revealed. It had never been hunted. The great cat moved through its territory with the confidence of something that had never needed to look over its shoulder. It made noise because nothing dared to track it. It left clear trails because nothing was brave enough to follow. Until now, Nari crouched behind a fallen log and watched the Nexa through a gap in the leaves. The creature was magnificent and terrifying. Its black fur seemed to drink the light, making it hard to see even when it moved. Its eyes glowed like red stars in the jungle gloom. When it stretched, she could see muscles moving under its hide like steel cables. But she also saw something that Nexa couldn't see. Kale was moving toward its territory from the east. The Saurid champion had been having a good hunt. His section of jungle was littered with dead creatures. Crystal wolves, acid spitters, thorn bears, all had fallen to his claws and strength. Now he was tracking something bigger, following a scent trail that he thought would lead him to easy prey. He didn't know he was walking into the Nexa's hunting ground. From her hiding spot, Nari pulled out a small piece of cloth from her backpack. She used her knife to make a tiny cut on her palm, letting a few drops of blood soak into the fabric. The smell of human blood was strange in this alien jungle, strong enough to be noticed, foreign enough to spark curiosity. She tied the cloth to a thin branch and placed it where the wind would carry the scent toward the Nex. The great cat's head lifted immediately, its red eyes turned in her direction, nostrils flaring. Human blood was something new, something that didn't belong in its territory. Nari was already moving. She ghosted through the undergrowth, staying downwind and out of sight. Behind her, she could hear the Nexa following, its massive paws making soft thuds on the jungle floor. She wasn't running from it, she was leading it. Every few hundred yards, she left another small sign. A broken twig here, a disturbed patch of earth there, another drop of blood on a leaf. Nothing obvious, but enough to keep the great predator interested and moving in the direction she wanted. On the station, The watchers were starting to understand what they were seeing. "She's not being hunted," breathed Ambassador Thek. "She's doing the hunting." "But what is she hunting?" asked Elder Zek. Captain Tay pointed to another screen that showed Kale moving through the crystal caves. "Not what? Who?" The Saurid champion had found the border between his sector and the deep jungle. His reptilian senses told him that something large and dangerous lived beyond the tree line, something that would make a worthy opponent. Kale grinned, showing rows of sharp teeth. He had been hoping for a real challenge. Meanwhile, Voss was finishing his own hunt in the frozen wastes. Ice bears and frost wolves lay dead around him, their bodies already turning to frozen statues in the bitter cold. He had heard roars coming from the jungle and decided it was time to eliminate the other champions. His crystal body began to phase, becoming translucent as he moved toward the warmer sectors. Rim had been the most successful hunter so far. The shadow marshes were her perfect environment, and she had fed well on the creatures that lived in the dark water. Now she too was moving toward the center of the hunting grounds. Drawn by the sounds of larger prey, all three alien champions were converging on the deep jungle. Just as Nari had hoped they would, she reached the ancient temple ruins that sat in the heart of the Nexa's territory. The structure was old beyond measure, built by some long-dead civilization. Broken walls and fallen columns created a maze of stone and shadow. This was where she would spring her trap. Nari climbed onto a fallen pillar and pulled out her tablet. Her fingers moved quickly across the screen, calling up everything she had learned about pack hunting and persistence predation. Humans had once hunted mammoths by driving them off cliffs. They had caught fish by building traps in rivers. They had brought down predators much larger than themselves by making those predators hunt each other. She activated the tablet's sound system and played a recording she had made during her 20 minutes of listening, the hunting call of her injured Nexa. The sound echoed through the ruins like a challenge. The real Nexa froze when it heard the call. For the first time in decades, another of its kind had entered its territory. The sound spoke of weakness, of prey that could be taken. But it also spoke of competition that had to be eliminated. The great cat's roar shook the jungle. Kale heard it and smiled wider. Finally, a real fight. Voss heard it and began moving faster, his crystal body shifting through the trees like living glass. Rim heard it and melted deeper into the shadows. Preparing to strike from darkness, all three champions entered the temple. Ruins from different directions, each thinking they were the hunter. None of them saw Nari, who had found the perfect hiding spot in the temple's highest tower. From there, she could see everything while remaining invisible herself. The Nexa padded into the central courtyard, its red eyes scanning for the challenger that had dared to enter its domain. It smelled the alien scents of the three champions, but couldn't see them yet. Kale emerged from behind a broken wall, his claws extended and ready. When he saw the massive shadow cat, he laughed with pure joy. Now this is worthy prey. The Nexa turned toward him, muscles bunching for a spring. But before it could move, Voss materialized in the air above it, his crystal body becoming solid as he prepared to drop down and pierce the cat's skull. That's when Rim struck from the shadows, her dark form wrapping around Voss like living night, trying to drag him back into the darkness where she could feed on his fear. For a moment, all four predators froze in perfect balance, each one focused on a different target, each one convinced they had the advantage. Then Nari did something that changed everything. She played another sound on her tablet. Not a hunting call this time, but something much simpler. The cry of a human child. It was just a recording from her research files. The sound of a young girl calling for her mother. But in the alien jungle, surrounded by death and violence, it was something none of the predators had ever heard before. Something small and helpless. And absolutely terrifying in its innocence. The sound broke their concentration for just 1 second, and, sometimes, 1 second is all it takes. The Nexa, confused by the strange sound and surrounded by enemies, did what any cornered predator does. It attacked everything at once. Chaos exploded in the temple ruins. The Nexa's roar shook dust from the ancient stones as it launched itself at the nearest threat. 12 feet of muscle and claws slammed into Kale with the force of a falling tree. The Saurid champion's armor-like scales saved his life, but barely. He rolled away, leaving deep gouges in the stone where the Nexa's claws had scraped. Finally, Kale shouted with joy, his own claws extending. A real fight. Above them, Voss was struggling with Rim's. The crystalline hunter tried to phase through her darkness, but Rim had learned to wrap herself around his solid core, the part of him that couldn't become incorporeal. "You taste of fear," Rim whispered, her voice like cold wind. "I will feast on your terror before I kill you. I fear nothing." Voss replied, his crystal body flashing brighter as he fought to break free. On the galactic station, the Watchers were on their feet, cheering and shouting bets. This was the violence they had come to see, apex predators tearing each other apart. In a frenzy of blood and death, magnificent, roared Ambassador Vec. "This is how real hunters fight." Only Captain Tay remained calm, his eyes not on the battle, but on the small figure hidden in the temple tower. "She's not done yet," he said quietly. He was right. From her hiding spot, Nari watched the battle with the cold calculation of a scientist studying lab rats. Everything was going exactly as she had planned. The three alien champions were so focused on fighting each other and the Nexa that none of them had noticed her. They had forgotten the human entirely. This was their first mistake. The second mistake was thinking like apex predators. For all their lives, Kale, Voss, and Rim had been at the top of their food chains. They had never needed to think defensively, never needed to watch their backs, never needed to consider that something might be hunting them. They fought with the confidence of creatures who had never been prey. But Nari had grown up on Earth, a world where everything was trying to kill everything else, where humans had survived by being smarter, not stronger, where the greatest predators were those who could think like their prey. The battle raged below her. Kale and the Nexa were locked in deadly combat, claws against claws, strength against strength. The Saurid was skilled, but the Shadowcat had home field advantage and decades of experience. Dark blood began to flow from wounds on both fighters. Voss had managed to break free from Rim's grasp by superheating his crystal body until she couldn't touch him. Now they circled each other warily, light against shadow, each looking for an opening to strike. The four predators had forgotten the first rule of hunting. Always know where your prey is. Nari climbed down from the tower, moving like a ghost through the ruins. The sounds of battle covered any noise she might have made. She reached the temple's ancient control room, where broken machinery still hummed with faint power. Her 20 minutes of listening had told her about these ruins. The vibrations in the ground, the way certain stones felt warm to the touch, the faint electrical smell in the air. All signs that this place still had active systems. She plugged her tablet into what looked like a dataport. The ancient alien technology was different from human computers, but not so different that she couldn't understand it. Energy flowed through circuits. Data moved in patterns. Commands were given and received. The basics were the same everywhere. Her fingers flew across the tablet's screen as she accessed the temple's defense systems. Outside, the battle was reaching its climax. Kale had managed to wound the Nexa badly, but the Shadowcat had hurt him. Too, both fighters were slowing down, their movements becoming sluggish as blood loss took its toll. Voss and Rim were still dancing their deadly dance of light and shadow. The crystalline hunter would phase in and out of solid form, trying to strike at her core. She would wrap darkness around him, trying to find his weak points. None of them noticed the subtle changes beginning to happen around them. Ancient lights began to flicker in the temple walls. Dust fell from ceilings as hidden machinery came to life. The air began to taste of ozone and electricity. The Nexa was the first to sense something wrong. Its animal instincts screamed danger, but it couldn't identify the threat. The Shadowcat's head swiveled back and forth, red eyes searching for something it couldn't see. That moment of distraction was all Kale needed. The Saurid champion lunged forward, his claws aimed at the great cat's throat. But the Nexa was still the apex predator of this jungle. At the last second, it twisted away from Kale's strike and lashed out with its own claws. The blow caught Kale across the chest, sending him flying into a stone pillar. The sword hit with a sickening crack and didn't get up. Kale, Ambassador Vec, screamed from the station. His son lay motionless among the ruins, dark blood pooling beneath him. The Nexa turned toward where Voss and Rim were still fighting. 2 enemies down, 2 to go. It gathered itself for another spring. That's when Nari activated the temples. Defenses. Energy beams lanced through the air like solid lightning. Ancient weapons that had guarded this place for thousands of years came online all at once. The temple had been built by a paranoid civilization that trusted no one and feared everything. Its creators had died long ago, but their security systems lived on. The first beam missed the Nexa by inches, carving a smoking line across the stone floor. The second beam was aimed better, but the great Shadowcat was fast. It leaped aside, muscles bunching and extending as it bounded toward the nearest exit. For a creature that had never been hunted, it learned very quickly. More beams filled the air. Voss tried to phase through them, but energy weapons didn't care about incorporeal forms. One beam caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around. He crashed into a wall and lay still, his crystal body flickering between solid and translucent. Rim melted into the deepest shadows she could find. But the temple's sensors were designed to find hidden enemies. Targeting beams swept back and forth, searching for her heat signature. The Nexa was almost to the exit when Nari played her final card. She activated the temple's sonic defenses. Sound exploded through the ruins, not just loud but targeted. Frequencies that disrupted balance, pitches that caused pain, rhythms that confused predator instincts. The ancient builders had studied their enemies well. The Nexa stumbled, its perfect coordination shattered by sounds that attacked its nervous system directly. It crashed into a wall, shaking its great head as if trying to clear it. But even wounded and confused, it was still the apex predator. The great cat turned toward the control room where Nari was hiding. Its red eyes locked onto her through the broken doorway. For the first time since the hunt began, Nari felt real fear. The Nexa gathered itself for one final leap. 12 feet of muscle and claw, driven by pure killing instinct. Nothing would stop it from reaching the small human who had dared to trap it. Nothing except its own rage. The Shadowcat sprang with all its remaining strength. Claws extended, jaws open wide. But in its fury, it had forgotten about the energy. Beams still sweeping through the temple. 3 beams converged on the Nexa in mid-leap. The great predator that had ruled this jungle for decades, that had never known fear or defeat, simply ceased to exist. Silence fell over the temple ruins. Nari sat in the control room, her hands shaking as the adrenaline finally hit her. Through her tablet's screen, she could see the aftermath of her trap. 4 of the galaxy's deadliest predators, and only she remained standing. On the galactic station, the Watchers sat in stunned silence. They had come to see apex predators hunt and kill. Instead, they had watched a small human girl outsmart them all without throwing a single punch. Elderzek leaned forward, his crystal eyes studying Nari's image. "Impossible," he whispered. "She eliminated them all without fighting." "She didn't eliminate them," Captain Tay corrected, with quiet pride. "She made them eliminate each other." Ambassador Vec stared at the screen showing his son's motionless form. "How?" he asked in a broken voice. "How did she know?" Captain Tay smiled sadly. "Because humans have been prey for most of our history. We learned to survive by being smarter than things that wanted to eat us. And sometimes, the best way to defeat a predator is to make it think like prey." In the temple ruins, Nari slowly stood up. Her legs felt weak, but she was alive. More importantly, she had learned something that would change everything. The galaxy's apex predators had a weakness they didn't even know existed. They had never learned to think defensively because they had never needed to. But the hunt wasn't over yet. As Nari picked up her backpack and prepared to leave the temple, warning lights began flashing throughout the ruins. The hunting grounds' final phase was beginning. Now she would have to face the deadliest predator of all, the planet itself. Red lights flashed throughout the temple ruins. A deep humming sound rose from beneath the ground, vibrating through the stone and into Nari's bones. The ancient machinery was waking up completely now, and it was not happy. Warning, a mechanical voice spoke in a language so old that Nara's tablet could barely translate it. Hunting phase complete. Elimination protocol beginning. All remaining life forms will be terminated in 60 minutes. On the galactic station, Elder Zek nodded with satisfaction. Now we see if the human can survive the true test. The hunting grounds themselves are the ultimate predator. Captain Tay watched the screens with growing worry. Around the temple, sections of jungle were already beginning to change. Plants withered and died as poison gas seeped from the ground. The sky grew darker as storm clouds gathered with unnatural speed. "What is that?" asked General Rox, pointing at the displays. "The final phase," Elder Zek explained. The hunting grounds were designed to eliminate everything after the champions finished fighting. Only something truly worthy of the title Apex Predator could survive what comes next. Nari felt the temperature dropping around her. Frost began forming on the broken stones, even though the jungle had been hot and humid moments before. She pulled her jacket tighter and checked her supplies. Water, medical kit, rope, knife, and her tablet. Not much to face a planet that was trying to kill her. The ground shook beneath her feet. Cracks appeared in the temple floor, and through them came a greenish gas that made her eyes water. She quickly pulled her shirt up over her nose and mouth. But she knew it wouldn't help for long. She had to move. Nari ran from the temple as the ruins began to collapse behind her. Ancient stones that had stood for thousands of years crumbled like sand. The defense systems that had helped her defeat the other predators were now turning against her. The jungle was dying around her. Trees that had been green and alive were turning black and brittle. The air filled with ash as plants burned from the inside out. Strange creatures fled past her, running from something they couldn't see or understand. Above her head, the sky flashed with unnatural lightning. Not the clean electricity of a normal storm, but something twisted and wrong. Where the lightning struck, the ground turned to glass or burst into flames. Nari found herself running toward the crystal caves where Kale had hunted earlier. The rocky ground might offer some protection from the gas and lightning. But as she ran, she felt the air getting thinner. The planet was changing its atmosphere, making it harder to breathe. She reached the cave entrance just as the first real wave of poison hit. Green clouds rolled across the landscape like fog, killing everything they touched. Nari dove into the cave and pressed herself against the wall, using her jacket to filter the air as much as possible. For a moment, she was safe. Then the ground began to shake again. The cave walls were moving, not collapsing, moving, like the throat of some giant creature swallowing its prey. Nari realized that even the caves were not safe. Nothing on this planet was safe. She pulled out her tablet and tried to think. Every challenge she had faced so far had a solution. The carnivorous plants could be avoided by understanding their trigger mechanisms. The other predators could be outmaneuvered by using their instincts against them. Even the Nexa could be defeated by making it fight the temple's defenses. But how do you fight an entire planet? The answer came to her as she watched data scroll across her tablet screen. Environmental readings, atmospheric composition, energy, signatures, all the information her device had been collecting since she landed. The hunting grounds were not really a planet. They were a machine. A massive ancient machine designed to test and eliminate life forms. Every environment, every predator, every deadly trap had been carefully planned and built. The jungle, the frozen wastes, the crystal caves, the shadowed marshes, all artificial, all controlled by computer systems that were thousands of years old, and, like all machines, it had rules. Nari studied the patterns in the data. The poison gas was released in cycles. The lightning struck in predictable sequences. The temperature changes followed a mathematical progression. Even the way the caves moved had a rhythm to it. The builders of this place had been scientists, just like her. They had created the ultimate testing ground, but they had also built-in safeguards. Ways to survive if you were smart enough to find them. She began to see the pattern. The hunting grounds were designed to test different survival skills in order. First came physical prowess. Could you fight the predators? Then came intelligence. Could you outwit the environment? Finally came the ultimate test, persistence. Could you refuse to die long enough to outlast the machine's power supply? Nari smiled for the first time since the elimination phase began. This was a test she was born to pass. Humans were the masters of persistence. Her ancestors had hunted mammoths by chasing them for days until the giant animals collapsed from exhaustion. They had survived ice ages, droughts, plagues, and disasters that wiped out other species. The secret was not being stronger or faster or smarter than their enemies. The secret was simply refusing to give up. The cave walls pressed closer together. Trying to crush her, Nari wedged her backpack between the stones, creating a small space to breathe. When poison gas seeped through the cracks, she used her water to create a crude filter with her shirt. When the temperature dropped, she moved constantly to keep her blood flowing. Hours passed. The hunting grounds threw everything they had at her: lightning that turned the cave entrance into molten glass, gravity fields that tried to crush her against the walls, sonic attacks that made her ears bleed, freezing cold that made her fingers too numb to work. But Nari had something the machine's builders never expected: experience with a death world. Earth had taught her people to survive anything: hurricanes, earthquakes, volcanoes, blizzards, droughts, floods. Her planet had tried to kill humans for millions of years, and humans had survived by being too stubborn to die. When the gravity field pressed down on her, she thought of her grandmother climbing mountains in Korea. When the sonic attacks tried to shatter her mind, she remembered her father working in the noisy factories of Seoul. When the cold tried to freeze her blood, she recalled camping trips where she had slept in snow. Earth had trained her for this without her even knowing it. The machine began to run out of power. The attacks came less frequently. The environmental changes became smaller and weaker. After 6 hours of constant assault, the ancient systems were finally running low on energy. But Nari was still alive. She sat in her small shelter, battered and exhausted, but breathing. Her clothes were torn, her body was bruised, and her supplies were nearly gone. But she had outlasted a machine that had been killing champions for centuries. The red lights stopped flashing. The humming sound faded away. The poison gas cleared from the air. Silence fell over the hunting grounds. On the galactic station, thousands of watchers sat in stunned disbelief. They had come to see apex predators tear each other apart. Instead, they had watched a small human girl defeat the deadliest testing ground in the galaxy by simply refusing to die. Elder Zek stood slowly, his crystal body reflecting the lights of the station. "Impossible," he whispered. "No one has ever survived the elimination phase. The machine has unlimited power." "No machine has unlimited power," Captain Tay said quietly. "And humans have unlimited stubbornness." Ambassador Vec stared at the screen, showing Nari crawling out of the crystal cave. His son was dead, along with 2 other apex predators. But this small human had survived everything the galaxy could throw at her. "How?" he asked. "How is she still alive?" Captain Tay smiled with pride. "Because she comes from a death world, and death worlds don't raise quitters." Nari stood in the clearing where she had first landed, looking up at the sky. The jungle around her was slowly returning to life as the machine's systems shut down completely. Birds began to sing again. Plants uncurled, their leaves toward the sun. She had won. A transport ship descended from the clouds, coming to take her home. As she waited, Nari thought about what she had learned. The galaxy was full of apex predators who ruled through strength and speed and natural weapons. But they had all made the same mistake. They had forgotten that the greatest predator was not the one that could kill the fastest. It was the one that never stopped trying to survive. The ship landed, and Captain Tay stepped out with a huge smile on his face. "Ready to go home, champion?" Nari shouldered her battered backpack and walked toward the ship. "Ready," she said. "But first, can we stop for food? I'm really hungry. Captain Tay laughed. Anything you want. You just won humanity. 3 star systems, Kulnari said as they boarded the ship. Also, I'm going to need to write a really long report about predator behavior. This was the best field research ever. As the ship lifted off from Vex Prime, leaving the silent hunting grounds behind, Captain Tay shook his head in amazement. The galaxy had just learned why Earth was called a death world, not because it was hard to survive there, but because anything that could survive, there was ready for absolutely everything.